It's good afternoon in South Africa. We're coming back from Johannesburg, live from the City of Gold. Grandfathers came here to look for the gold. Others were fortunate, but others were not. That's the story of Johannesburg. Once again, my name is Mokopana Ramasubana. Welcome to the Decolonization Conversation podcast. Today I'm privileged to be seated with Prof. Caitlin Blaser-Mapitsa, a friend of mine, and just to tap into her mind. I know she has a very special mind in the way she thinks about things. Welcome to the Colonisation Conversations podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been long coming, but we're here.
Exactly, we made it.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you about you've got few lenses to look at things. You know, the way I look at you, you have an interesting mind of looking at complex things and trying to understand these things. I want to start off with knowing who you are, because I've got a very strong belief that who we are define what we do, and why we do what we do. How would you answer someone who asks, who's Caitlin?
You're starting with a very difficult question, you know?
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. You know, some questions like this get easier over time, and some of them get more difficult, I think. Yeah. And, you know, I think nobody's identity is one thing. I grew up in Nebraska, so I was born and raised in America on a farm, and I think growing up on a farm in a very flat place is kind of a fundamental part of my identity. Growing up in a place where you can watch the sun rise and set every day was really formative in my life, I think. I came to South Africa in 2001 and thought I would stay for a year, and here I am 25 years later. And I think that's also quite an important part of the story of who I am. You know, sort of seeing and becoming part of a lot of transitions within South Africa at a place where, you know, I was understanding society and social change, how it's measured, what our responsibilities within it are. And that was, I think, really catalytic, both, you know, to my own life and identity, and also my career as an evaluator and as an academic. I'm also a mother to 3 kids, and I think those are a few of the important pillars of who I am.
That makes who you are, yeah. Interesting that Corey, your son, was one of the youngest delegate at the Africa conference. I think
Yes. I'm also very introverted. I tend to spend time by myself, and for anybody else who struggles with networking and large conferences, bringing a baby is a wonderful strategy. Even last year I went to an Africa board meeting recently. Nobody recognized me, and then someone said, "You were the one with the baby." And everybody all of a sudden knew who I was. It was great. It really took the pressure off of me.
I was talking to you the other day. You say he's a big man now, he's more responsible, he's going to school, and so it would be nice to see him after so many years. I think one of the interests I have for talking to you is around, you're a scholar of migration, and we've seen migration as a topical issue in South Africa in recent times. And I wanted you to help us to dissect the construct of migration and maybe try to see if the intersection between it and decolonization, which is really the focus of our podcast. What would be your response to that?
I mean, I think migration, certainly in South Africa, but also globally, is very topical at the moment, because I think it's really hitting on a lot of points that are currently, you know, levers for social change at the moment. I think one of the things I remind myself of is that if it were a country, the African diaspora would be one of the highest populated countries in the world. And I think the way that we think about the conflation of race, history, movement, and geography is really fundamental to how we think about decolonization, how we think about, you know, social and political change. And I think, you know, we can't necessarily divorce the xenophobic tendencies in South Africa today, for example, from a lot of the failures of South Africa to address issues of equality, of participation, of decolonization, which I think are really fundamentally linked.
So how would you define the construct of decolonization? What does it mean for you?
Again, a tricky one, as someone who is basically a descendant of colonizers myself, you know? I mean, my heritage is, I suppose, like many American white people, sort of a generic mix of European ancestry. You know, I have a little bit of Irish identity, a bit of Scottish and German, and, you know. And in America, at least, most of that is sort of immaterial in your day-to-day life. I mean, some people maintain some ethnic ties through food or culture or something like that. My ancestors immigrated so long ago that it was largely immaterial. And I think for me, the most important thing about decolonization is it's an acknowledgement of contemporary global power structures, economically, politically, socially, and thinking through what some of those things mean for the way that we think about, define, talk about development, which, I mean, I think the development sector as a whole is, maybe crisis is a strong term, but is at a point of change, right? Where a lot of the, I don't know, both patrimonial and also somewhat racist and also, I don't know, sort of old and tired ideas that, you know, the global south has problems and the rest of the world needs to help them, all while having caused them in the first place, is at a point where it needs to change. And I think decolonization is one of the conversations that will give us some of the tools to enable those shifts. Not the only one, probably, but I think it's something that has to be come at from a lot of different directions, I think, to figure out how the conversation can come together holistically.
And I mean, as you yourself admit that you come from the ancestors that were mostly responsible for the contract of colonizing Africa. And what is your observation with your other colleagues, maybe from the European world, you know, in terms of the conversation around decolonization? Do you think there's a reception, there's admission, or it varies?
I mean, I think it definitely varies a little bit, like within South Africa, and you talk to people and, you know, you hear some people blaming apartheid and some of them, you know, saying it as a causal and historical fact. This is why we have the unemployment situation we have, for example, and other people, you know, being tired of these explanations or pointing to counter proposals. I think it really varies. I think awareness of it varies a lot. I think there are definitely many places. My father was a history teacher. That might be another part of my identity that's quite important. And I think there are a lot of people that simply aren't aware. Not necessarily, you know, I mean, you might know generally that colonialism happened, but not aware of what that has produced now today, socially, economically. But I think even where there is awareness, where we get stuck is what we do about it. And I think one of the things that decolonization makes very clear is the importance of charting out a shared future on equitable terms. But I don't think what it gives us the answer to necessarily is what that can and should look like, for whom, by whom, you know, who needs to do what to make it possible. Yeah,
and I think sometimes it is rendered as a theoretical, you know, conversation, and it almost stops it there without necessarily offering some of the who by what by whom, you know, when, you know. So I think sometimes it makes it a little bit rigid. I'm picking up that the fact that your father was a historian could also be responsible for why you want to be an equitable and a good human being in life, you know. Is that true?
You know, I think that might have been one piece. My father, both of my parents actually were very influential on my formative thought, but also Nebraska is an extremely conservative religious place. and my family was not at all religious. And I think one of the challenges that created in negotiating, I mean, very famously, I got sent home from kindergarten when everyone was sitting around in a circle and being asked which church they went to. And everyone, there were almost as many churches as there were city blocks in the small town I grew up in. And my answer was that religion was the opiate of the masses, which of course I had heard from my parents. I had no idea what it meant,
So
I was 5.
It came from the socialist orientation.
Yes. But issues of morality, of navigating the right thing to do and what that means, it made me see from a very young age how social power can be exercised, both progressively and also to oppress. And I think seeing that in a very local sense, in my immediate surroundings, sort of shaped the direction that my studies and that's why I think a lot of the social energy in South Africa when I first came really resonated in a whole society trying to figure out, okay, now how do we do the right thing?
That's interesting. And maybe going back to your work, and part of the reason why we're sitting in class format like this is because Caitlin is a teacher. So I thought it's a good idea to sit in a classroom like this. The other fascinating thing about you was even how you acquired your PhD. It was not a traditional way of studying for 4 years. I don't know, it's very complicated for me. Maybe you'll explain it to me again how you went about it. Because I want to focus a little bit on your work in writing and your contribution to the decolonial conversation. Tell us a bit about some of the papers you wrote around that, and what were you aiming to contribute when you wrote them?
I think as always in the PhD journey, what I was aiming for and where I got were two quite different places. But I suppose that means learning happened, right? So I suppose it's only a good thing. So I did my PhD at the African Center for Migration and Society, and I was looking at how local governments respond to mobility. And it was a sort of comparative case study piece that looked at 6 different municipalities across South Africa to figure out how are they considering migration, spoken broadly. So it could include international migration, it could include migration from rural areas to townships, from townships to the city center, all of these. How are municipalities dealing with populations on the move? And I was very unequipped to understand the context of rural South African municipalities. I didn't expect my field work to expose violence and corruption. I didn't, we got chased out of a meeting once being accused of spies and, all kinds of things that, young and
so
innocent.
You needed a bodyguard at some point.
Yes. In fact, at one point we got escorted to a meeting by people with machine guns. We were walked through the forest to an unmarked location. I was like, what am I doing with my life? In what I thought was an incredibly, almost like technocratic piece of research. I thought I was going to be sitting with municipal budgeting planners talking about, IDP processes. And there was some of that. But I think what I saw and found out was how live a lot of the processes of decolonization are in the public sector and in people's experiences with participation, with violence, with aspirations and hope. And I don't think my PhD was by published papers, which was a good experience for myself as an academic to get sort of a baptism by fire into academic writing and the timelines of journal publications, things like that. But I think what it did is sparked an interest in how this goes forward. I don't think it necessarily answered any of those questions, but it shifted the way that I was thinking about how to understand some of the social changes.
So I mean, you always said, for me it sounds like you had the opportunity of the foresight of, this Pax what sometimes called xenophobia or whatsoever. So what are some of the findings that you can share that you could even see then when you were doing your research?
I mean, some of the things that surprise me, right, is how little people actually move. Right, you know, we talk about migration as this thing, you know, as like there are masses knocking on our doors and everything, but actually, real mobility is really limited, and where you see it, it follows not necessarily predictable, but very established patterns. So in places where systems of labor migration were very established by the apartheid government, those are still the migration patterns we're largely seeing today. You know, there were cases of, for example, xenophobia. You know, we did some field work around Lepelale, which was building the Medupi power station at the time. And for that, there were like teams of Slovakian welders and like different, you know, people coming from all over the world bringing their technical expertise, you know, trying to, and you would find, I would say, occasional xenophobic sentiment, but not at a like mass scale. That you're like, when people are face to face with communities of difference, they're actually able to respond with a tremendous amount of nuance, of, you know, Ubuntu, of openness, of curiosity, in a way that I feel like the current kind of xenophobic trends, they're not driven by people who, by and large, have a lot of experience with migrant communities beyond the stereotypes that are created in, you know, whether it's through media, through, you know, political mobilizations. And that to me is one, was a bit surprising to me. I mean, I think a bit similarly, just to relate it to my own growing up, right? I grew up in a very predominantly white community. And it was surprising for me to hear that it was considered racist, because it's really hard to be racist when there aren't people of any other race to be racist towards, right? I mean, you might have stereotypes or, you know,
people,
and seeing the way it expressed itself very differently in South Africa was a big learning process for me.
The other key question would be, do you think South Africans are xenophobic?
No, definitely not. I mean, this is, I think, one of the unfortunate things that comes through in the media reporting, for example. I mean, you see mobilization, and I think a few different things are happening, right? I think overwhelmingly South Africans, I mean, to talk about South Africans as a whole is tricky, right? Because it's diverse and divergent and all of that. But I think you see xenophobia happening in South Africa, but I think it comes from specific places. South Africans are, I would say, willing to mobilize around issues of injustice. And some of the xenophobic mobilization we see, I think, is related to actual grievances, problems of service delivery, people not being heard, people not having, you know, ways of connecting to decision-making bodies. And xenophobia happens to be the spark that will bring people together. But I think by and large, it's not coming from like a deep-seated social hate necessarily. It's coming from experience in a particular kind of mobilization around exclusion. I mean, that's not to say you won't find individuals who hold xenophobic views, of course, but...
No, I hear you. And maybe moving a little bit away from the migration space into the academic terrain. Your observation around, because if you read guys like Heleta, he keeps making suggestions around how can universities decolonize on a very committed basis, you know. But what is your reading around South African university decolonizing, and maybe even the region, and what is it required for that to move away from theorizing about or agitating for decolonization, but to be more pragmatic for universities?
Oh, that is a tricky question. And again, I suppose my default answer to everything is it's very complicated.
Yes.
if there were a simple answer, we would have done it.
That's a very good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest challenges in South Africa actually isn't at the university level, right? It's in the education pipeline prior to university. So I think one of the difficulties I had transitioning into academia is to see this divergence between students who were extremely conceptually sound but had limited foundational academic skills. So they had great ideas, but they couldn't express them in a way that is conventionally acknowledged by academia. And at the same time, other people who were, excellent writers, very fluent in English, very, but they didn't have the same conceptual depth. And so some, I hate to say like low-hanging fruit, but some easy things that can be done are finding some of the ways to translate that, to value the intellectual depth outside of the, conventional ways of conversing. And some of that you can address really simply by shifting your Marx rubric a bit, by, creating space for other forms of learning and assessment. But a lot of the things around valuing people's backgrounds and their lived experiences in the classroom, I think are very legitimate, but also very difficult to implement in resource-constrained environments. And I do think that's one of the challenges facing South African higher education right now, is just that the growth of student numbers hasn't had the concomitant growth in resourcing of academics, of support staff, particularly actually, because a lot of the challenges students are facing are not necessarily academics. It's to be able to access the academic space, to have funding to study, to have childcare, to have, it's all of the life things outside of academia.
So I think the reforms for as you're saying, it's end to end. The reforms should happen where transformation occurs within the basic, and then it sort of also intercepts with the higher education. I think that's a good point. So one of the things that Mebagele likes about you was that you called what did you call it? A globally renowned scholar. In one of your papers, I think you said you must invite Mapitsa. You must. I just thought I should tell you that he was very proud of the fact that you called it out. So maybe talking about I know of your move from this thing of identity. Your move from Johannesburg to Limpopo. As a way to empower your kids to be able to speak their home language, how is that going?
I think this is an excellent example of some of the challenges I see in the primary and secondary education systems, right? Like I myself, the efforts I've gone to get formal instruction in Sepedi.
I know a lot of.
I feel like I've made a solid attempt, and it is so hard, difficult, and similarly for my children. Obviously, academics, activists, many people in this area understand where the gaps are. It's hard to find learning material. It's hard to integrate it in meaningful ways. It's hard to find, good systems of assessment. All of these things are tricky, but they definitely confound the problem, right? And it's complex because this then has knock-on effects all the way to the university level. In many ways we're seeing the tail end of the problem. When
it's even without your continuous commitment actually, to make sure that they get empowered in that space, you still find constraints of people who are available to offer that, extra lessons and so on. Good luck with that one.
Thank you.
I hope at some point you find a solution. So I think in terms of concluding our conversation, what is your? Me and you operate more in the evaluation space. What is your observation of the discourse? Now there's Made in Africa evaluation approaches that's kind of like hitting the ground. From where we started to where we are, what is your observation?
I think we've seen a lot of movement happening, but I don't know that it's necessarily been in a consolidated direction. So I think we went from, 10 years ago or something, when these conversations started, or maybe 15, there had to be some, creating awareness, some some finding out what was where. And I feel like that moved so quickly. It lit a fire, its time had already come, and everybody was like, okay, we see the need, this is spot on. And I think especially in evaluation, right? Evaluators spend, 90% of our professional lives trying to tell people as delicately and politely as possible that their thing didn't work. And often with a lot of apologies, just because it didn't work the way you wanted it to, it doesn't mean it didn't have value. It doesn't mean someone did something wrong. It doesn't, but ultimately, I think that's where the development sector is, right? Like a lot of things aren't working. And I think Made in Africa evaluation is uncovering one of the primary reasons why. And I think even though it automatically hit people's imaginations and we see, okay, yes, this is right, we need things that are locally owned, that are contextualized, that are responsive, all of these things. Now we're all of a sudden sitting with a situation where everybody knows what needs to be done, but actually doing it is much harder than we thought. So it's something that a toolkit isn't going to shift again the systemic inequities that have driven this. A good approach, a solid evaluation team isn't able necessarily to be the lever that transforms all of the problems that created the need for it. And I think on one hand, it's a great opportunity because I think there's never been so much consensus about the failures of development. But I think at the same time, there's a lot of danger. I mean, we've seen with the closure of USAID, for example, that there will be a wave of conservatism. I feel like COVID also cracked open an opportunity for change. And instead of being able to, build more progressive pathways, what we saw was a lot of backtracking. And I think I have a concern at least, that there's the potential that some of the Made in Africa dialogue is going to also face that backlash. I hope I'm wrong.
That makes me sad.
Me too.
What is really the issue? We know that development for the past century has not necessarily worked. And we all know that something needs to be done. But what is it actually that must happen?
I was very influenced. My kind of entry into monitoring and evaluation came through working with the Secretariat of the Global Call to Action Against Poverty, which is a coalition of national advocacy organizations working against poverty and inequality across the globe. It was really formative, and one of the things that struck me most, actually, I think I was in my very first meeting of the Global Steering Committee, and we were doing some problem analyses about changes, shifts in poverty and things like that. And one of the board members from Latin America was getting very visibly frustrated and said, this whole thing is ridiculous because we don't have a poverty problem, we have a wealth problem, and nobody's willing to confront it. And I think to some degree she was quite prescient, because I think that is now very evident in the sort of global political shift. The problem is rampant inequity. It's a distributional problem. It's not a problem of poverty per se. It's a problem of political will to address issues of redistribution. And again, I think Made in Africa evaluation has certain tools to assist with that. Like if we had the will to move towards a more just world, these are some of the principles, some of the philosophical foundations that would resonate in Africa, some of the program design principles that are relevant here that would be taken up, all of that. But people have to want to do it. And right now, I'm struggling to see that.
You as an academician, myself as a practitioner, what can we do to, at least to do our part, so that if people were to ask us later, would say we tried? What can we do?
You know, sometimes I think the answer is just to tend your own farm. You know, I mean, I do think some of the innovative things that are happening are valuable. Again, it's drops in a bucket, but one of the examples, like with the MasterCard Foundation, they do a lot of rolling out large-scale surveys, right? And I think it's a very small thing, but thinking about the way surveys can be more culturally informed and, you know, embedded in a certain ideology. It's one of those things that all methodologists like know in their hearts, but actually getting the chance to do is really rare. So these small innovations, I think, when they work well, when we reflect together, when we talk and share, like some of the, you know, initiatives you've been involved with and leading on, seeing how quickly Made in Africa evaluation went from kind of a marginal idea to something almost mainstreamed. Now I think I see it as an expectation in commissioned work that there's some Made in Africa evaluation component. Makes me think that when these small pieces are created or built on, they'll become mainstreamed very quickly. And I mean, changing systems of measurement, again, it's not going to be the one thing that shifts, you know, global development, but it's an important one.
It's more on just continue doing the work. And I mean, I agree with you that so far it has been mainstreamed. I think it can always go upper than where it is now, which is really my hope, looking ahead. What is your takeaway to the viewers of this podcast around the conversation around decolonization and how it intersects with the migration?
I mean, I think considering everything in its historical context is very important. And just, I mean, evaluators spend so much time looking beyond what's immediately apparent and thinking about the structures that are sitting under it. You know, what are the institutional drivers? I think this is definitely a time where it's needed in South Africa. Like, you have to look beyond the news reports of, you know, xenophobic violence or specific, you know, mobilizations, and think, you know, what's going on here institutionally and socially that's creating this thing that we see, because that's where the real story is, in my view.
Since you are a consistent reader, I usually ask my guests to give us 2 or 3 books that they read and make a huge difference in their lives somewhat.
I'm so glad you asked that, because I've got an excellent answer to it. I just now read Begging to be Black by Ankie Krog. I cannot believe it took me this long to read it. It was excellent. I picked it up one day when I was traveling. I read it on a 15-hour flight, the whole thing from cover to cover, and I felt like I came out of the plane a different person. It was so good.
That's nice. That's nice. What is the title again?
Begging to be Black.
Begging to be Black. Okay, I have not read that. I'll add it to my list as well. The second one?
I've read a very good book. Now, I'm going to get the exact title wrong right now. This is more work related, but on systemic approaches to evaluation, edited by Emily Gates. I'll look up the title and send it through to you, but also an excellent read, just in that, I mean, a lot of the things we talk about with Made in Africa and decolonizing evaluation are fundamentally about systems thinking, right? Just systems thinking from an African perspective. And so far, I think systems thinking is struggling with a lot of similar problems to decolonization. Like, it's very jargony, it's hard to make real. And I feel like this book took an important step in making these things tangible and accessible. And so that one was really very good.
Okay, the one you were excited about, you didn't tell us what it was about.
So it juxtaposes 3 different stories.
Okay.
One is the time that she was writing the novel, which was during a fellowship in Berlin, and understanding Germany's complex and sometimes violent history, which links to her own ancestry. A second plot line was around, she had been doing a lot of archival research around Moshoeshoe and his sort of consolidation of Lesotho, and basically the struggles he had in navigating ethical leadership at a time when there was encroachment on his kingdom from a lot of different perspectives, ideological encroachment, physical encroachment. And the third was relatively, you know, in the late 90s, when she had been very heavily involved in supporting the ANC in a number of ways. A leading member of the local ANC where she was living in Kroonstad committed a crime and hid the weapon on her doorstep. And she found it and had to navigate what ethical decision making looked like. And basically, I feel like all three stories tell about the challenges of doing the right thing when the world is changing in ways that you might not necessarily understand, that you can't always access, where the tools that you have to make the right choices are sometimes out of date. And I feel like where the development sector sits right now, it had such good lessons for like, okay, so how do we do the right thing with this mess of a world we're sitting with at the moment?
In a world that's divisive, in a world that's, you know, because one of the things probably she's raising is around how do you disown your own? How do you become loyal? When do you do the right thing? When I feel you are my comrade, and do I take the gun to the police station? Those difficult things that you have to make choices yourself as an individual. Maybe we get the last one.
The last one I read was actually, I'm now going to forget the name of the author, so I'm failing the test here. But it was called A Palace in the Desert, and it's a novel, a very short novel actually, about a Moroccan migrant worker to France who's on the brink of retirement and is building a house at home in Morocco. And it talks about his relationship with his children, who are all integrated into French society in a way he isn't. He doesn't speak French. He doesn't have social connections. Some of his children have married foreigners. Some of them are not practicing Muslims anymore. And his own expectations that when he retires in France, all of his children will come home and raise their families in his village.
And that will not be the case.
And that, yes. But so in thinking about migration, in thinking about like the personal journeys migrants go through and people's hopes for the future, their identities, their connections to place, that one was really, it was sad, but it did an excellent job in understand. It was told from his perspective, and it did an excellent job of understanding how people can become convinced of their own worldviews and how difficult it can be to change minds. I think we were talking about the same thing in the xenophobic situation, right? We can give data for days about what migration does positively for the economy, why it's good for society, but this is not something we can combat with facts, right? There's something else going on, and I feel like this book maybe gives a little bit of access to that.
I should, and I think you're going to WhatsApp me the names of the books you're recommending. I'll grab them and add them to my reading list. Thank you so much for making such a valuable time to get us thinking, because I think my idea also is around allowing us to be challenged, allowing us to learn something new, and you have done exceptional work in doing so. To our viewers, you may not know this about me, but my great-grandparents come from Botswana. They then moved to a place somewhere around in Malaysia where they stayed for a while. And the village that I'm very proud of is not necessarily my original village. What am I saying? I'm saying that I'm also a migrant. I've moved around, and most Africans have been moving around. So I think when we look at each other, we must at least deepen our understanding. It is understandable that we are frustrated the lack of service delivery, that makes sense. We are jobless, we have no job opportunities. We want to thrive and survive, but that should not necessarily allow us to do wrong to other people. Thank you so much for watching this podcast. We look forward to meeting you again in the next episode.